Welcome to the Freshman Foundation Podcast, helping you make the jump from high school athletics to the collegiate level and beyond, with your host, Michael Huber.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Huber, founder and CEO of the Freshman Foundation and certified mental performance consultant. The Freshman Foundation podcast helps young athletes and families be ready for every next step in their athletic journey. To learn about how you can be ready for the next step in your athletic journey, visit michaelvhuber.com. Thank you for listening to the Freshman Foundation. How is Nick Camilleri developing elite baseball players? I've been around baseball for more than 30 years as a player, coach, and fan. I'm comfortable in saying that anyone who's ever played the game at a high level falls in love with it. However, not every good player can be a good coach. Coaching baseball takes empathy and patience in addition to having knowledge of the game. My guest in this episode, Nick Camilleri, is the owner of Camilleri Baseball in Wyckoff, New Jersey. Nick is a former college baseball player who has made coaching young baseball players his life's work. In episode 58, Nick shares about his own experiences finding the right fit as a college baseball player and how he has used those experiences to mentor young players hoping to reach the same level. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's build your foundation with Nick Camilleri. Hey, Nick, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, how are you, Michael? Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Definitely want to talk some baseball today. Nick, so I guess the first question I would ask you is, as a former college baseball player, I know when I reached out to you, I had sort of seen something you posted on Twitter about your experiences in the recruiting process and how you sort of found your way to what ended up being the right fit for you from a baseball program. Can you just talk about your own personal recruiting experience a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So out of high school, I committed to a Division I school. My first offer, I wanted to play Division I really badly. I committed to literally the worst Division I school in the country. At the time, it was St. Peter's University, and I took it because it was a Division I opportunity. It wasn't a great baseball scholarship. It wasn't like a great school. It was just, a chance to play Division I. And I had some other good Division III offers. Where I probably should have went was the junior college level, considering I only had like a 2.83 GPA. And I didn't really know what I wanted to study. And honestly, if it wasn't for baseball, I probably wouldn't have went to college. So all those factors kind of led up for me to go to a junior college, which my high school coach kind of pushed me to go to Brookdale. But I didn't do it just because I wanted that kind of Division I label. So then I played at St. Peter's University for a year. I got about 90 to 100 at bats. I played in over 20 games, started a good amount. Got to play against like Wake Forest, some pretty cool schools, Richmond, St. John's. We actually beat St. John's, Seton Hall. We had about 10 wins. It was honestly a rough experience. Teammates weren't great. The field wasn't great. The school wasn't great. So I ended up going into there was no portal at the time, but you just kind of got your release form and you were able to go out and contact other schools. I contacted probably about like 75 Division I, II schools and junior colleges. A good amount got back to me. The ones that I really, I decided to go to Cumberland Community College in South Jersey. But even when you kind of commit to a junior college, you could still commit to an NCAA school. So the Southern New Hampshire coach and I stayed in touch. Scott Loazza, who's still there, who's probably who is the best coach I ever played for. And we kind of stayed in touch. It's like, hey, if you want to come up for a visit for the following year, we can kind of stay in touch. So I went to go visit. I went to go visit my mom and my brother. Division II level, you're allowed to like work a player out on campus. So I had a really good workout there. And he said, like, we're definitely interested in you. We'll stay in touch for next year, stuff like that. And, I right when I got home, I said, I would just want to go there. Like, I don't want to do the junior college thing. So I ended up, and I figured, like, if I did decent at a Division I level, like, how hard could it be at a Division II level? And little did I know this was, like, a minor league team. So that was, like, the most stacked team I've ever been in my life. I think we had, like, 50-plus wins. We made to the regional championship against St. Thomas Aquinas. We lost in Game 3, I believe. And I only had like 7 at bats. But it was hard being up there and being away from home and not playing. The first semester was great because it was a lot of development, a lot of baseball. I love my teammates. They took it very seriously, unlike St. Peter's. So Southern New Hampshire was awesome to me. And obviously I kind of saw the writing on the wall where I wasn't talented enough to play there. They were bringing kids in from we had a kid from West Virginia the following year after I left or after I graduated. There was a kid from Texas. So it's all Division I kickbacks and some really, really good high school guys to go out and get. So I decided, like, let me just finish up my career, get my degree. So I went to Ramapo College, not very enthusiastic about it. And, it turned out to be the best 2 years of my life, where I met all my good friends. We made it to a regional semifinal. We made 2 conference championships, and I played with 3 players who ended up playing affiliated minor league MLB baseball. One's still there now. 2 had a couple of short stints that I got to play with. So, that's kind of like my story in terms of recruiting and how I kind of bounced around. But, I ended up at Ramapo College up in Mahwah, and that was the best move for me, and I kind of wish I started off there.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's uncommon nowadays now with the transfer portal specifically. I think a lot of kids have a hard time finding the right fit. And it sounds like for you, and I think this is something that I see just sort of from the outside looking in, is that there's still a lot of, there's a really great desire from a lot of kids to take Division I offers strictly because they're Division I offers, rather than looking at the whole picture of like, is this the best fit for me as a person? And you just saying, hey, I want to play Division I, so I could say, hey, I played Division I. At what point with St. Peter's did you realize like, hey, this probably wasn't for you?
It was probably like the fall season, honestly, like kind of like right when we got going. Our coach, who was a very good baseball guy, he was a very good guy. He played AAA with the Orioles, TJ Baxter. I really liked him. But the school didn't make it a full-time position. It was a part-time position. So obviously it was financially tough on him. And that's something like me and my parents didn't know to ask or think about if your coach was full-time on our visit. So he did the best he could in the constraints that he had. But yeah, kind of like towards the end of the fall where like we didn't really have much individuals. We really didn't have a weightlifting program. Like guys would just not show up to lift and be like, okay. Stuff like that. Like, in terms of development, there wasn't very much hands-on coaching facilities. There was just like one cage and one little area for the pitchers to throw. So I kind of got after, even my friends who went to Division III schools, like they kind of told us like how they told me how they did it and like how their process of development was over there. And like, I was just kind of like blown away by like, what the hell am I doing here? So like mid-semester, I did want to leave, but one of our catchers ended up getting into a car accident, I think, and he kind of messed up his leg. So I got a call from our head coach, was like, hey, listen, like you're going to play a lot more than you expected this year. And right off the bat, I think in the first weekend we had Wake Forest on our schedule, Richmond, and Harvard. And Harvard had a pretty good arm that year, who ended up getting drafted. So like I was not going to pass up the opportunity. I'm like, well, at least I get some stats. And I still don't like it at the end of the year, I'm just going to leave. So I remember like being on the phone with my mom in the first weekend into conference play. That's when I wanted to leave. Kind of like when we were in the hotel, we were at Canisius. They kind of kicked our ass a little bit. So that's what I really like was like, all right, this is not for me. Like the team's not really a team. Like I hated being like away with, not away, but I didn't really like being far away from home. Even on a trip with those guys. So I had one good roommate, he ended up leaving, but kind of like as soon as the fall started winding down, getting into the individuals part of it, I knew it was like kind of weird how we didn't do some of the things that either like Division III or junior college schools did.
Yeah. Well, I think you raise a really important point, right? Like sometimes, listen, a lot of families don't really understand the recruiting process because they've never been through it, right? Especially if you're the first kid to go through it. And you raise a great point. Like asking a question like, is it a full-time paid position? You would never think to ask a question like that, but it makes a huge difference, right? If a coach is only making part-time pay and he's got another job, I mean, it's going to be really hard to be dedicated to the development of the players and the program. So like, you'd never think to ask that question. And then when you find out, you're like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, it wasn't even like my dad's a first generation here. My mom went to nursing school, so my dad went in and out to college. I kind of commuted. So they neither of them played sports. I was the first of three. My sister now plays Division II softball at Delphi, and my brother's a sophomore in high school. So now we have a better feel of it. But yeah, we knew nothing. We just kind of knew the amount of tuition and like the amount of tuition we got off, and if it was Division I, II, or III.
Right. Right. So, I mean, listen, I mean, at least you knew, sooner rather than later, and then you decided to move on to another program. And I think it is interesting too, that, for people who are listening, if you're a young athlete, like I think there's this perception that Division I is sort of the be all end all, but there's really good competition at all levels, regardless of sport, right? Particularly baseball, Division II, III, JUCO are really, really competitive. And so you can find competitive baseball and opportunities to get to the next level. You don't have to be at Division I, right? And it sounds like, with your experiences at Division II and III, to see other guys going on, super talented, go on to play at the professional level. Like you don't have to be a Division I guy to get drafted or to get signed after college.
Yeah, and I actually hosted a recruiting seminar at my facility this past weekend, and one of the guys who was speaking said Division III is not like a safety net. Like you should be proud to be a Division III player, and I think that especially goes to some of the better Division IIIs around here in the Northeast. There's a great conference in New Jersey here, the NJAC, up in Massachusetts, Babson, UMass Boston, SUNY Oswego. I mean, like those guys can take on any MAC, any C school, any day. Even Rowan from the NJAC is supposed to move into Division I until 2024, and I'm assuming they're going to jump right in the middle to upper part of that conference. And it's just because it's a lot of kickbacks. It's a lot of guys who are like, hey, the baseball here isn't that bad. Like, let me go develop and get on the field, as opposed to being on a huge roster where I might not have an opportunity to make an impact right away, or I might, my scholarship only covered half of the tuition. I'm still paying $40,000. So, stuff like that. And I think the biggest thing at college is like kind of getting to play, getting experience, and leaving with not a big number over your head in terms of loans.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit, right? So if I think back to when I played high school baseball, which is sad to say 30 years ago, I think we were in a time where we didn't have all the resources that we do now in terms of private instruction, club ball, video, technology, all these things, right? So I think when I was at that point, Division III was sort of like, right? But now you have so many players in the system who are playing baseball basically all year round and who are investing in private instruction at facilities like yours and strength and all these other things that they're doing. There's just a bigger pool of players who are qualified to play at the highest level. There's just not enough spots.
Yeah, of course. So like the way I look at it is like the MLB draft in 2020 was cut down to 5 rounds, and then following it was cut down to 20 rounds. So if you kind of think like a food chain, it's a trickle down effect, right? So now the kid who was drafted in the 39th round that might have been committed to UConn before 2020 is now going to UConn. So the kid who used to have the UConn spot doesn't go to UConn, now he goes to Marist. Now the kid at Marist that doesn't have that spot now goes to SUNY Oswego, and all the way down. So that's the kind of way you look at it. And what you were saying, Mike, in terms of resources, I mean, like, there's just so much more information, technology, even places to train at facility-wise. It's showcases. It's incredible. I know, like, before I was born, the only guy who really did showcases was Joe Wadika here in Rutherford. But nowadays, I mean, you could go check your email and spam box, and you'd have 30 invitations to go to a showcase or a workout or whatever. So, and that excludes social media. So yeah, there are a lot of resources. And just because of the trickle down effect from the MLB draft and the portal and roster sizes, it's really getting harder and harder to play at the Division I level. Never mind Division II and III as well. But yeah, I mean, we see more kids staying in the game because maybe they're a little stronger, they're a little faster. It's not so it's not so much skill at this point, whereas like you can find a really good athlete and maybe take a chance on them.
Yeah. So I'll go back to your playing days, right? So now you're sort of in the instructional side, but like, what were some of the things that you learned in college as a player that you didn't know in high school? Like, what were the biggest things that you learned as a player playing for better coaches and in better programs?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I say, and I just talk about this when I coach and I'm out of the cage, it's kind of the speed of the game. And, the better players know what to do, like before the ball gets hit to them, they know how to work counts, stuff like that. And that's kind of stuff that, like, it's not so much talked about in high school. It's just kind of like a very result-oriented game, just because, especially in New Jersey with the time constraints, where in college you're able to look at the process part of it and, in the constraints of Division I and II with individuals and things like that. Like, you don't really think about, these little things that might make you better. And it comes down to coaching, who could really develop. In high school, I remember just like my coach Legare, who I'm on his staff, like just yelling at me, catch the ball as a catcher, like, make sure you don't drop it and make sure you block it. And if somebody throws, just throw it around the base and maybe we'll get them out. But when I remember when I went to Southern New Hampshire, it wasn't like just catch the ball. Like, you have to steal strikes now, and you have to throw 7 out of 10 guys out. You're not going to play, and we don't want you to just block the ball. We want you to pick it up and throw somebody out. So the expectations definitely get a little bit better, determined on where you go. But again, it's like, things get a little harder. There's people trying to take your job. You're trying to earn a job. And like I said, like the competition at Southern New Hampshire was like unbelievable. So again, that kind of just goes to test what kind of program they are. And you kind of see the other side of it when like other bad programs aren't very good. And that's kind of the reason why, just like the time and effort of people you're around.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I'm curious about is, and I don't really, I see it from an outsider's perspective. I'm learning more about it, and you probably have a much clearer view on it. But listen, in the world we live in with high school players, so much of their process of development and recruitment is centered around travel ball, right? And so that's also a results-oriented environment, right? And so, like, can you just sort of talk about sort of the mindset that develops that you see with your players in terms of like going out and maybe producing in a showcase or playing in tournaments? Like, do players learn how to play the game the right way, because they're sort of gunning for a result rather than focusing on the process of development?
Yeah. So I'll put it this way, like, when it's time to be recruited, like, you should really try to go get recruited. Before that, it should just be getting better. So I had a conversation with a player the other day who's on like a big travel team. They take a trip to Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and I think Arizona. And he's now into his junior year, and the UCFs of the world and the Dukes of the world and the University of Alabama's and UConns aren't really interested. And I'm like, at what point do you shut that down and just focus kind of making it a little tighter and be like, okay, where do I want to go to school and where do I want to look? High school ball. I'm a high school coach. I do not hate travel ball like I know a couple of people do. But the reason why high school baseball isn't as highlighted as the summer ball is just, college coaches can't come see you play during the spring. I mean,
right, they're in season.
They're in season. So I think that's why the summer is so important. But like, if you look at a team like I coach at St. Peter's Prep, we're in Jersey City, a team like Seton Hall is in West Orange, probably a 20-minute drive. But they're practicing at 3:00 after class, Monday, playing Tuesday, maybe playing Wednesday, practicing Thursday. They're on the road Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that's, we play at 4:00 in high school. So I think high school kind of gets a bad rap, meaning like nobody gets recruited in high school, but it's just from the constraints. I mean, even Division III schools, our practice time at Rampo is 3:30. Our game time at St. Peter's Prep is 4:05. Unless you have like a fourth or fifth coach on that staff to go out and go see a game, it's kind of hard to run a practice and go recruit. So I think that's why high school gets a bad rap. But in terms of summer ball, yes, I do think development and teaching the game in terms of like holding on runners and double cuts and back picks when somebody bunts and bunting and bunt defense is kind of put aside for, okay, we got to get this guy here at this time to see this guy, see him play, for him to get recruited, for us to, do our job, what parents pay us for. So yes and no. It's a give and take, but again, it's kind of towards the constraints of what everybody can accommodate to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think I think that travel ball process to some extent aligns with the recruitment process in the sense that like, I think there's plenty of really good travel clubs out there, right? Again, I'm not as close to it as you are, but I do have some familiarity. I think it's the same, right? Finding a club that's a fit for your family, right? Finding a club that does value development as much as you can do it, right? Has good coaching staffs, has professional coaches, right? Those things matter versus like just like assembling 9 guys and throwing them on the field so they can go play. And like, they're not really coaching you, right? It's the same at the college level, right? Like it's almost mirrors your experience, right? Like, okay, I'm going to go to St. Peter's. I'm going to play Division I because it's Division I. And then you get there and you realize like, this isn't exactly for me, right? I think it's investigating sort of where's a good fit for you, rather than just sort of being like, okay, what's the most, exposure I'm going to get or the most playing time I'm going to get. I did want to share this story. I thought this was really interesting. This is again, like, I'm somewhat naive to this process, but I went to a high school game this past spring. It was a Shore Conference playoff game. And unbeknownst to me, I'm standing next to a gentleman who's wearing a Seton Hall shirt. Turns out he's the Seton Hall head coach, Shepard, right? And we start talking, and he's scouting players at this game. And he said, which I thought was really interesting. He said, I like to come to these games because I want to see how kids react in a situation that matters, right? So contrasting travel ball, right, to see a kid who's playing in a showcase or something, they're just trying to get their numbers. Now they're playing in a game where it really matters because they're playing with their teammates and they're trying to win a game. I want to see how they compete. I thought that was really interesting, and I can't imagine that's super common because of the constraints college coaches have. But I mean, what do you think about that in terms of like really understanding what a player is all about, watching them in a game like that actually has some meaning?
Yeah, of course. Like, you want guys to produce in high stress levels. I'm pretty sure everybody has a story of the kid who's great in BP, who looks great in a uniform, who runs a 6'8", who hits the ball 105 miles an hour, but in the game it just doesn't happen. And we know as a coach, like, you take a chance on that kid, hoping he pans out. But as Coach Shepard mentioned to you, like, you want the guy who's going to get the fisted double over the first baseman's head with, a 3-2 count and, in a game that matters. The BP home run isn't going to play at that point. I actually recruited from St. Peter's first in a state tournament game against St. Joe's Montvale. So the game was like super intense, and you go to Diamond Nation. It's a 3-2 game. Maybe you got a runner on second and third as a hitter, and you strike out. Like, nobody cares. You're going to go to Sonic, and you're going to come back and play at 5, and you're going to go home and go to sleep, play Sunday morning, and that's your weekend. So I totally understand that. Like, those games have way more bearing, and you're even social. If you go back to school and you get a 2 RBI single and you win the game, like, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, right? How are you going to respond to that at the college level? Whereas you strike out, maybe like, how's your attitude going to be in practice the next day? So 100% what Coach Shepard is saying is true. And again, summer ball is great. I mean, it's a good time just kind of relax and play and showcase yourself. I've been to some pretty high intense summer bowl games, but nothing that compares to, like, a New Jersey State tournament game or a Bergen County tournament or a Shore Conference tournament. So, and that's why I think even, in terms of football up here is so good. Bergen Catholic, Don Bosco, St. Joe, St. Peter's Prep, DePaul Catholic, like, it's so good because the players are so good. So I think coaches get like a good treat coming to see New Jersey high school sports in general.
Yes.
And see how people handle, stressful environments.
Yeah. So from a coaching perspective, with the types of players that come into your facility that you're working with individually, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges you see with high school players in terms of like things that they're trying to get better at or things that they struggle with that they really need to work on at the high school level before they get to college? Like, what are some of the things that you're really emphasizing?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is they need to worry about playing good in games. And I know in the constraints of New Jersey, we don't play all year long like California, Texas, Florida. I do know that there's some 9-year-olds still playing outside, which is ridiculous to me, but that's another story. But they need to play good in games. I have a lot of parents and players tell me, like, they throw this on the Rapsodo, they hit this on the hit tracks, whatever. And like, this is my life. Like, I'm saying, like, nothing you do in the cage really matters, right? If there's a guy who on the field who produces more, he's probably going to be the guy who, has a longer career. So the first thing kids need to worry about is, okay, like, you're talking about all this stuff, but how did you do on the field this summer? How did you do on the field this fall? And, opportunities aren't going to present themselves if you are not good. So that's the first thing. Like, we look at the baseball player, right? Is the baseball player good? Two, a lot of kids I have are extremely undersized in terms of weight, strength. Nobody wants a 150-pound shortstop at the high school, college level anymore, right? They want guys who look like, Bobby Wood Jr. and Bo Bichette, who's even a little on the smaller side, but these guys are ripped, they're toned, they look like cornerbacks in the NFL. So I get a lot of guys who just aren't their bodies just don't cut it. I mean, go watch a college baseball game, like if you're in New Jersey, like Seton Hall, Princeton, Rutgers, Rider, St. Peter's. Like, you go look at those guys, like they're pretty shredded, they're big. I hate when I have a kid come in, he, is really undersized and he's worried about, exit velocity or throwing velocity. Like, dude, like, you look at the guys in the show, like, that lefty from the Astros who won the World Series in game, I think it was 6. I mean, he had to be 215, 220 pounds. So these guys are
He's
pretty massive.
Thick dude.
So, yes, I forgot his name, but
is that Framber Valdez?
Yeah, Valdez. He had a lefty. So, number 2, you got to be in really good shape, right? And even if you're a skinny guy, like if you're ripped up, like that's your game, like that's fine. And then 3, the skill set, right? So we got to focus on skills. So, like, if you had a great year offensively, but you can't feel the ball, like that's probably something you should look at, and vice versa, right? Everybody loves Coach Noda from Wagner. I talked to, like, everybody loves to hit, right? But you gotta want to be good at your defense too, right? So as much as you stress like the bat, if you go 1 for 3 with a single and 3 errors, you're not going to be in the lineup the next day, even though if that single was 100 miles an hour. So I think kids need to understand where they lack, where they need to get better. And that's where, like, having reliable sources come in, and, with a good travel coach, with a reliable recruiting service that, like, we use in my family for my brother, with a good high school coach, with a good strength coach, stuff like that. But I would say the biggest thing is in-game development. 2, get in the weight room, whether it's to gain weight or the case is not very often to lose weight. And when you lose weight, not to lose too much weight, because I have seen that before. And 3, your skill set, right? Like, maybe I have a great pop time, but, in the game I hit 100, right? I hit 100 a batting average through the high school season. Like, it's definitely not going to cut it. Like, you see a lot of, like, 78, 82 in high school. Like, if you're not barreling balls up at that rate, like, you can cross all Division 1, 2, and a high level Division 3 off the level, and, like, hopefully you find somewhere small to play.
Yeah. Listen, I think so my bias is sort of the mental side of baseball, right? And I think you've kind of hit on that without using that word, right? Is mental, right? One, competitiveness is the ability to, right, go out and compete, against other people and not let the failure get you down, because going into the cage or going in and being, evaluated, what's my exit velo, what's my throwing velo, right? Like, that has nothing to do with your ability to go out and compete. Because I'm sure you've seen, and I know I've seen, I played a lot of baseball in my life, guys who throw mediocre at best, but they know how to get guys out because they locate the ball, they mix their pitches, they're smart, and they go after you, right? Like, it's not always about the metrics, right? And then the last piece of my defense, right, just as an example, I think a lot of kids so overemphasize production at the plate that all of their self-worth as a player is tied up in their hitting, right? And so you can go 0 for 3 in a game, but if you field your position and you save runs, there's value in that, right? And a lot of kids are just so distorted in terms of the way they look at the game. If I don't hit, I'm not producing. Well, you're going to not hit because it's baseball and it's hard. But if you go out and make the plays you're supposed to make and you save runs, there's value in that. And they don't take any confidence out of that. They just assume, like, oh, I should do this, but I got to hit or else I'm not good. And it's just such a, like, I think the way that players I see, and I work with a lot of high school and college kids, the view mentally is so distorted that they have a hard time with failure because they're not really looking at the big picture the right way.
Yeah, I could definitely hit on that. Like, I have a catcher who's not particularly great with the stick, but he's getting a lot of Division I opportunities because he's so good behind the plate and he commands the game so well. And the stick's coming along. He's going to be a good player this year in New Jersey. But, just to attest to that, defense goes into it, especially if you're a catcher, shortstop, second base, center fielder. You could have a real good game, go 0 for 3 with a walk, steal base, and lock it down at shortstop. And you should feel pretty good about yourself. And there's definitely a place in the game for those type of players. We see guys in the show all the time, like comes up to bat, he's hitting 123, but he's got a job, which is incredible to me. Like we didn't see that probably 15, 20 years ago, probably when you were my age. If you weren't hitting 250, like you didn't have a job in the MLB for a long time, and if you're hitting 250, you better hit a couple bombs. But even at the what you kind of said, like guys who don't throw particularly hard, like there's a place for you. Like there's a place for you at Division III schools, Division II schools, at low-end Division I schools. I mean, at Southern New Hampshire, we faced a kid named Adam Gross. He was a lefty that threw sidearm who threw maybe 62, and every time we had a lefty come up, Derek Bauer, they went left on left and. Gross won every battle in the 8th inning. And that was a Franklin Pierce Southern New Hampshire battle, which was great. And that kid ended up going to play in this NECBL. He had a great career. So there's a place for all those guys. But again, everybody's so looking for the metric jump because that's so easy the metric jumps are so easy to display on social media and advertise at a PBR and advertise at a perfect game that kind of lesser kids who maybe don't throw 87, who throw 77, they feel the need for that jump. Where in actuality, this kid on the mound is 6'2", 215. God gave him better genetic parents than you, right? So kind of worrying about the 77 kid, okay, I'm getting outs in games. I'm working my tail off, trying to get more velocity. This is me. This is who I am right now. I'm just going to keep working until I lose in my head, which you kind of understood, like the mental side of it. Like that's your velocity and your exit velocity isn't who you are.
Yeah. Well, I think to me, from where I sit, one of the things that I talk about all the time, regardless of who you are, what you play, is what you can and can't control, right? Genetics is sort of one example of that, right? Genetics are genetics, right? And maybe, right, if you're a kid who's sitting in the high 70s in high school, maybe it's just a matter of hey, I'm not in the right place in terms of my strength development, right? Maybe I need to go find somebody else who can help me put on that muscle that can get me into the 80s so that I could get to play at the Division III level. Some kids bloom late, right? And I think as players, we're so, you hit on it before, it's like social media in the world we live in, everything is instant gratification. I work with a kid, so give you an example, it sort of ties together some of the things you were saying. I personally individually work with a kid who plays Division I at a high level of baseball. And he's 6 foot, 205, 210, put together, plays shortstop, fields everything. Legit, he's a major league shortstop fielding wise. And he's this big, strong kid. He can move. He makes all the plays. He does what he's supposed to. When he came to work with me, he's like, I want to get drafted and I need to get better I need to get better at the plate. I need to hit better. And a lot of it he felt was mental. So we started working on that. But as we got to know each other and the draft was coming up last year, he's like, well, I'm getting some interest. And I said, listen, dude, you don't know how these 32 major league teams value players. You assume that they want to see a guy hit 350 and hit 15 home runs. I go, there's a spot, to your point, for everybody. I go, if you're a guy who's 6 foot tall, 210 pounds of muscle who can move and field everything, and you play in a Power 5 Division I conference and you hit high 2s, 300, which is where he was at, someone's going to look at you and go, this guy can help my club, right? Will you get to the major leagues? Who knows, right? But you've got to value yourself. You don't know how other teams are going to value you. So go out and do what you do well. Try to get better at what you think you need to get better at. And then the chips are going to fall, right? You can't control what people think of you. And that goes for recruiting, right? I think a lot of kids get so hung up on what other people think of them. How am I being evaluated? If you just go out and do what you need to do to get better, those opportunities are going to come if you stick with it. But if you get so hung up on what do other people think or where are these offers coming from, or am I going to get drafted? It's going to be debilitating because now all of a sudden you're always questioning yourself about every time I make a mistake, what's this other person going to think of me? And you just can't play baseball that way. There's no, you can't be confident and be worried.
That kind of goes to the social part of it too. What are my teammates going to think of me? What are the girls at the game in college going to think of me? Stuff like that. Because it kind of goes into if I don't do A, I'm not going to be A, who you think you should be in your head. So a lot of it goes back to the mental side of it and kind of seeing your whole player, like what value you add to playing baseball. And it goes back to like being a good baseball player, not just being good in the cage or showcase or whatever. So yeah, I think a lot of it, like you said, is the mental part of it and the social part of it. And, you want to be in New Jersey, like you want to be on John Kroger's Twitter video with a winning double, right? And if you're not, you're kind of like, oh, my buddy is, like, I don't want to talk to him the rest of the day. So now you bring that home with you. And it's a snowball effect where it's like maturity versus immaturity thing, which kids get better as they get older. But yeah, to your point again, what really value are you vested? Who's really vesting in your value?
Yeah. I think the other piece that gets overlooked by a lot of kids is like, am I a good teammate, right? Like, am I like patting my teammate on the head? Am I supporting my teammate? Am I on the fence? Am I running hard no matter what? Like, baseball coaches, any coach in any sport wants to see that, right? Like, you don't realize that has value when someone's looking at you from a recruiting process, right? Like, are you a good teammate? Do you play hard? Do you back your guys up, or do you drop your head? Do you have bad body language? Do you point your finger at your teammates? Do you make a scene? Like, kids don't realize that, like, they think that that's normal, but it's not. Coaches don't want to deal with that shit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, my buddy Andrew Turner just got done coaching at Wagner College. He was just talking at my facility about it. And when he went to Diamond Nation, he, if you got up and he was looking at you and you grounded out and didn't run it hard at first, and you walk back, you walked it off or put your head down, cross, right? So there's a million guys who just put like crosses or X's or lines, because at the end of the day, you're trying to build a winning culture. And a coach who isn't trying to build a winning culture shouldn't be in the job, right? If you just recruit players based on metrics and, I guess, positive in-game performances, like your locker room, your bus ride, your plane ride, your study hall is not going to be good, right? If you have half the guys who buy in and work their ass off are good teammates, like that's the type of guys you want to be around. But then you have the other half are cancerous guys who, don't show up to class, don't show up to study hall, like pout when things don't go their way. They're happy when they hit a double, when they strike out, the helmet goes flying. Like, stuff like that really brings down the culture. And you spend all this time together with people, like, you don't want to be around those kind of people. Not even in terms of baseball, like in life. Like, you don't want to go hang out with the crew that's like always miserable or always upset or always, tired or whatever. Like, that brings you down. So it kind of goes for the same thing as being in a locker room, as being in a clubhouse and stuff like that, like a dugout. Like, there's points in college, like there's guys pounding in the dugout. Like, you just kind of want them to get out, right? So again, like if you're that guy, like there's a coach looking to cross you off, because, all my friends, college coaches, like they go to Diamond Nation, they get a packet handed to them with 1,000 players in it. They need to get down to 5 or 6 players. And from those 5 or 6 players, maybe 1 or 2 get offered.
Right. Right. The Diamond Nation thing is so fascinating to me. I spent some time there last summer watching some of the players that I work with, and I had never really been exposed to that sort of environment of like, it's just like this big baseball factory, right? Like just games going on and coaches roaming around. And it's really, really interesting because it's just not something that I was exposed to when I was in high school. And I think that it's great that kids can play all year round, especially at a facility like that. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like kids must get desensitized at a point because they play so many tournaments and they play so much baseball. It's almost like a job, right? It becomes almost like a job at a certain point. Like, what's your take on that? I mean, do you think that playing more baseball is better, or do you think that there's too many opportunities and maybe there needs to be a little bit more sort of break in the action?
I'll put it this way, if the best players in the country, if you want to be one of the best players in the country, you see these guys getting, let's say 120 at-bats in high school and then another 200, 150 in the summer. If you want to be the best, you're going to have to go out and try to play the most, right? Because like the game teaches the best experience. So I'm a proponent of playing a lot. But at the same time, when like the season's over, the season's over. Like, I don't think anybody should run out. Like, I see a couple colleges I really respect, and colleges I'm friends with, like, even like a prospect camp this time of year, like having somebody throw at this point of the year, unless they're, are throwing off the mound, which is very rare at this point. Like, how much are we really going to throw before the kid is like, again, desensitized from like, am I just throwing to throw? Am I throwing to win the game? Right. And that kind of goes back to how much we play. And you really kind of find the kid who like wants to be there from day one when it's, the Super 17 at Diamond Nation and there's a million scouts there. And then when you're getting to the back end of July, when maybe there's only, Drew and William Patterson is there, not the Big Ten and Big Ten and Big East there. So you kind of find the kid who really does love it, and the kid who wants to get better and sees it as a process instead of like a result oriented manner. So again, I think that kind of determines like what really kids want it, what really kids don't. Because like there are kids that say they want to play college baseball and their parents say they want to play college baseball. But when you kind of like let them know the schedule and like what kind of life you have, like they have, like, okay, like, no, I don't want to do it. Like I had a great conversation with a kid the other day. He's like, if I don't go to like a Rutgers or like a big school where I can go to the football games and hang out, I don't want to play college baseball. Like that's so refreshing to hear, right? Because like a kid actually knows what he wants to do. There's so many kids that, even at Rampa, we had a bunch of kids like recruited, like that, like, they go to the first party, like that's it, right? So I think you kind of like during that time you find out like, who really wants to play, like who's showing up to the stretch, like leading the stretch, bouncing up and down, ready to play on a Sunday morning at the back end of July when they're juniors, they have their license, their friends are down the shore on the beach, partying and stuff, and you're like, you want to play baseball. So that really is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's something I talk a lot about in my work is motivation, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because at the end of the day, if a kid goes to play college baseball, which it sounds like you've had this experience, right? Like if you're playing just to play, like the amount of work that you have to put in to just keep your head above water is so much. It's like, there's so many kids out there going, and regardless of sport, who are going like, why am I doing this? Right? Do I really love it? Do I really love the grind of college baseball or whatever sport I play? Or am I just doing it to say I'm doing it? Because otherwise, just go be a kid. Like you said, go hang out and go socialize and go to the football games and go to parties. And like, because not everybody's going to be a professional baseball player or a college baseball player. And that's okay. Right. And I think that that's something I think a lot of kids struggle with because they put so much time and energy into the sport, take baseball, and the parents spend so much time and energy and money that there's almost like this unspoken expectation of like, I played travel baseball for the last 8 years and we've gone to Georgia and Alabama and Arizona and all these places. And, we go to Diamond Nation every weekend and I go to instruction, I go to a strength coach and I do this and that. And now I don't want to play college baseball. Like, it's like, I'm sure you see that in the cage, right? Like, kids who come in just going through the motions because they feel like they have to.
Yeah, no, I definitely have like, there's interested players and there's really committed players, right? Like, the point that I always see is like from a high school perspective, and this goes back to when I was playing high school, was like, who's moaning and groaning about the Memorial Day practice, the day after Memorial Day, whatever, before the state tournament, and who's like wants to be there and show up. So like, I remember like I did like growing up, like my dad always raised me like kind of like it's like a privilege to play baseball, right? Like you get to, like my parents were never waking me up like, oh, we got to go, we got to get in the car. Like my dad's like, if you don't wake me up, if you don't tell me what time the game is or where we have to be, like you just won't go. I don't care. Like, I'll save my money. I'll save my time. And I think now a lot of it is like, maybe it's parent driven, right? Like the parent knows where to bring you, what time, stuff like that, which is probably way different than it was back in your growing up.
Big time.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that kind of just drives the desire of like interested and committed. The committed kid kind of is on top of it. Like I say to kids like, oh, like, where's your game this weekend? They're like, so I know me,
ask my mom, she's got the calendar.
yeah. Like I know me, and then they get to turn around the cage and be like, Dad, when are we playing? I'm like, at this point, I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's a stretch. But I know me, my brother, and my sister, like my sister for travel softball used to book her own hotel, used to book her own airfare. My brother for travel baseball right now books his own airfare. So again, like, are we? I'm not bragging about my siblings, but are we the best? Probably not, but we are definitely committed. Like, as a college coach, as a high school coach, you want those kind of guys in your dugout, on your roster.
Right. And I love that. And I appreciate that. I have my own kids who are now getting to the point where sports are becoming more serious. And I say the same thing. Like, if you really want this, I'll support you, but I'm not driving the bus. I have things that I have to do. Right. And I think we do live in a world where kids are just, they're just shepherded through all this stuff without having a vested interest, and they take it for granted because someone's telling them like, you have to be here. Like, that's just not the way it's going to work when you get to college. You want to go play college baseball, you're going to have to show up on time. No one's going to get you out of bed. No one's, you have to figure this out yourself. And I think you're right. Like, ultimately it's more sometimes about the motivation of the player than it is about the talent level. Because if a kid wants to be there and they're not as good, but they want to be there and they want to get better, that's the kid I want to coach, right?
Yeah,
in general.
I have a kid, of course. I have a kid who's committed to Northwestern. Zach Selfon, he was like probably the first really good player I got 3 years ago. And in my facility, it's very small. There's not much room to stretch if both cages are going. Zach used to show up probably 20 minutes before his lesson, stretch in the parking lot or in the vestibule in the hallway to get himself going. And, that's a Northwestern Big Ten commit. So that's kind of like what it takes. Not like, dad pushing in there and you got to take your coat off and then your phone's in your hand, stuff like that. So just little things like that. And you really see the better kids do better things. And it's like, who's really vested and who's really not. Like, there's even some my brother's team. I mean, they play games and the other team I saw this summer, full count baseball, the kid's waving his hand for a water. My my brother's pitching in Georgia, ran out of water. He's like, he'll figure it out. It's just it's baseball is not the priority in life. It shouldn't be. And I think that's where kind of gets mixed in families and things like that.
Yeah. But listen, at the end of the day, because it's a big business, because parents are investing so much time and energy, and the parents get caught up. And I talk about this a lot in my work and on this podcast about sports parenting, right? And there's just parents are so overinvested in sports at that level because they want to keep up with the Joneses, or they want their Johnny or Mary to be a college athlete or get a scholarship or get the recognition for all of the investment they've made. And that's just a recipe for resentment, right? At the end of the day, if the kid doesn't really want it and they feel like they have to do it because the parents have put all this in, it's just not going to work out in the end for most kids. The kid has to want it. And if they don't want it, that's okay. But, it's not going to end well when you show up and your coach is kicking your ass and, no one's there to tell you hey, you need to show up here. You need to put that work in yourself.
Yeah. The biggest thing, you just said, is keeping up with the Joneses. I even had, guys want to go to junior colleges and their parents are looking down on it. I'm like, listen, because it's just kind of keeping up. I would need him to go to school, this and that. It's just listen, you have to do what's best for the kid and what does the kid want. And it's not so much as for lack of better terms, a pissing contest. My kid went here, so my kid goes here. And it's everybody's jumping everybody where and especially in a world where the mental health is declining, unfortunately, we have to really look at what makes kids happy to an extent, right? You can't make kids eat cookies and lollipops all the time, but to an extent of if he just wants to do this, right? Maybe it's not an Ivy League school, but he's in school, he's not doing drugs, not in the street, so just let him do his thing. He's not a bad dude.
Right. Well, that's exactly it, right, Nick? We all find our way, right? If I look back on my life and all the choices that I made, was every choice that I made a good one? Arguably, no. But I got to where I am because of those choices. We learn from them, right? And sometimes we have to let kids make those choices on their own, even if they're not the ideal choice, right? JUCO is a perfect example. You mentioned Brookdale earlier, right? Brookdale has a really good baseball program, right? You play baseball at Brookdale, you're going to play some pretty good baseball, and you're going to get an offer, probably, if you're a good baseball player, an offer to go on and play a 4-year school eventually at some level. Plus, you're not spending all the money that's associated with playing at a Division I level, because Division I programs get 11 and a half scholarships. They got 30 kids on the roster. You're probably going to get a quarter scholarship at the best, right? So you're still playing $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to go to a Division I school. Whereas you could pay $5,000 to go to Brookdale, play good baseball, and then transfer on a half scholarship because you've produced at the college level, right? People don't really understand that. If the kid, that's what they want to do, let them do it, right? They'll find their own way. And if they take ownership, it's probably going to have a better result at the end.
Yeah, especially in wealthier areas in the state, I feel like people don't understand college is not for everyone. And college baseball is not for everyone either. If you have trouble getting to school for an 8 a.m. start, you're gonna have trouble getting to a 5:30 a.m. lift in the cold. So, I mean, like, again, it's not for everyone. Like, being great is not for everyone. Being mediocre is for people, right? So that's kind of the approach. Like, you have to look at it if you really want it. Like, like I'm not going to go to Rampo College, and I'm not going to play Division III baseball. And I to wake up at 5:30 a.m. Like, I rather just, like you said, go party at Rutgers or go party at Indiana, which is fine. But again, like, it has to be driven by the kid, not so much the parent. And I think that's why we see, even like, I know so many kids who went to college baseball and ended up quitting or having like huge loans. Like, I went to St. Peter's. I think with my academic and baseball scholarship, I was paying $35 a year for that 1 year. I went to Rampo and commuted. My buddies always let me stay in the rooms like during the season, but I paid $15,000. So, I mean, I played more, I paid less. I probably got a better education. I met my fiance there. So, I mean, like, it's not, again, it's driven, the decisions were driven by me, which, in the end, you're happy about.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you have your own business, which, like, that I think gets a lot of times driven by the fact that you're okay making your own decisions, right? You're willing to take those risks and do it yourself versus being somebody like making those decisions for you, and like you just get a given, right? So, like, yeah, I think it's really important. So as we're sort of wrapping up here, I guess, like, I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about what you're doing at your facility philosophically. Like, what's that look like when you're working with a high school player? Like, what sorts of things are you really emphasizing with them to get better as players? And maybe we've touched on some of it, but like, just to kind of give you a platform to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I work with about, I would say, like 50 to 60 high school hitters in New Jersey, a couple from New York. And I strictly just do hitting instruction. I wanted to be a college baseball coach. I got into it at Rutgers Newark. It wasn't for me. So I kind of just like started doing lessons. When COVID hit, I found like a nice little area, a nice little spot where, obviously real estate was real cheap. I found basically, a garage, did some work there. I started in my backyard, then I jumped to there. I've been fortunate enough to accumulate a really good players in the past 2.5, 3 years. And basically what we do is hitting. At this point of the season, we're kind of just refining mechanics. Once January rolls around, we'll kind of get the machines pumping. We'll look at velocity. We'll look at, spin, stuff like that. So my goal is to, make guys perform at the highest offensive level they can. And if they don't, I do take complete ownership. Like, I lost a pretty good player from this year to last year who's a pretty good player, but he didn't have the year he wanted. So obviously I understand it moving on. And, I like the results driven. It's a results driven business, right? And I like working with the higher end player because I think I'm very good at taking a good player to be really good and not a bad player to be good. I think there's a special person that can really help younger kids, which I don't think I'm great with. I think I resonate with the high school kids well because I went through it at such a moving level. I saw so many different things. I'm able to connect with them. But yeah, what we try to do basically is, make a complete hitter. We try to stay, even though I've hit tracks, I know I'm going to get crap for this. We try not to focus too much on the metrics, and we try to keep everything relative to the player. The dude who's 6'1", my guy from St. Joe's who's 6'2", probably 200 pounds and absolutely shredded is going to hit the ball harder than, the dude that's, 5'8". And so keeping it super relevant to each player, kind of focusing on getting yourself better and not keeping up with the Joneses, like you said. And then from there, I try to do a little help with recruiting for my guys. So we try to do like some some showcases. We do like some seminar stuff like that. I'm in contact with college coaches daily, probably. Even if it's just passing along a player in my area. I coach at a high school, St. Peter's Prep, where I went, so I'm involved there. But yeah, I mean, I don't do anything fancy. I don't run like huge clinics or, this or that. Like, I kind of just have my hitters and I try to take care of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being in a similar business, I think coaching comes down to trust, right? Do your clients trust that you have their best interest at heart, right? Sometimes it's not exactly the methods, right? It's more hey, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you get better. And if that means that what I'm trying isn't working, I'm going to try something else to make sure that you're getting to where you want to go versus like, this is the way I do it. And if you don't do it my way, then it's the highway. And that's certainly not the way I coach. And it doesn't sound like that's the way you coach.
No, yeah, I there's a bunch. I mean, I guess like philosophy wise, like I go off like Jake Epstein and Steve Schwartz from Stance Doctor, Steve Teal from Teals and Wyckoff is my mentor. I kind of stick by those guys. You always try different things, but you try to make it really flexible to the kid, get the barrel behind the ball, and like when they get in the game, it's just kind of like go compete. I have a bunch of good competitors, even though I haven't had all of them in the game. Some of them I have. And the other thing is, yeah, just like. I base my business around in-game results. So, like, I always ask parents for video. My guys at Mawa High School, I have a few of them. I always go watch their games because they're up the road from me. Bosco is right there. I have a couple of those guys. And again, I just try not to make it like a tie your shoes. Like, let's hit for 45 minutes and I'll take your money and, like, I'll see you next week. Like, I try to make it, like, really results-oriented. And, like, I want to see kids through who obviously do want to play college baseball get to that point. And from that point, I would consider it a success. But, I would say like my 2025 class, the sophomores high school right now is like my really core group. And, once I grow up, kind of be able to judge, if what I'm doing is actually working.
Well, I mean, yes. And listen, I mean, it's definitely a results oriented business. But I think, and I'm in a little different boat because I work with a lot of baseball players, but it's a lot harder to see the results of mental training than it is, I think, any sort of physical instruction. But at the end of the day, I think does the player think that they're getting the results that they want? Are they getting better? They're the only judge of that, because what I would say is just because you're not getting results statistically on the field doesn't mean you're not getting better, right? Your numbers could get worse, but you could get better as a player because there's so many things you can't control. And I think it's up to the player to decide, like, am I getting better or am I not getting better? And that's a fine line. And I think if your intention as a coach to help players do everything they can to get better and go compete and go out on the field and have the tools to succeed and solve problems on their own when you're not there, to me, that's success. And you just never know when someone's going to be happy or they're not. So you do the best you can and you hope for the best.
Yeah. Like I said, I've been fortunate enough to get like a good amount of high level players that understand like the process of it and not so much the results oriented of it. I mean, like I get a text like I went 0 for 3, but like I barreled up 3 balls. Like that's a great text to get. Stuff like that. And not like, like when the kid sends me a video of the bleeder down the left field line, I'm like, dude, like why are you sending this to me? From in terms of like, reposting it or acknowledging it as opposed to evaluating it, which is totally different. But, like I said, I've been very fortunate to have some really high level players and, and I just think the best kids are the best competitors. That's why multi-sport athletes are always so good. Always so good. And like, it's kind of getting shaved down more and more to sport specific, which is good and bad. The skills get really better, but I find, the kids, even through 8th grade who played 2 sports, like it's just such an advantage mentally. And again, like a kid might you might not be able to see a mental training advantage like on a stat card or on a video, but if the kid's walking off the field, going home a little bit more happier, like you've definitely done your job and, you've let the kid enjoy the game a little bit more. Like I said, you're playing the game, you're chasing the goal, you're off the streets, you're not doing drugs, like you're making a group of friends. So, that's what it all comes down to youth baseball. I think a lot of people like lose sight of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the word that comes to mind when you say that is perspective, right? And I think that's certainly something that I'm a proponent of in the role that I have, which is to say, like, listen, let's keep it in perspective, right? There's only so many players that get to the highest level of baseball. We're all going to retire at some point. Like, what does it mean? I'm a competitor. I get to play. It's a privilege, right? Like I'm out there with my friends, having a good time, staying healthy, having fun. Like there's something to be said for that, right? It's not life and death necessarily. And if you treat it like life and death, it's going to be really hard to enjoy baseball. So then at a certain point, it's like, well, why am I doing it? Right. So keeping some perspective is critical, albeit you still want to be a competitor and you still want to get better and you want to go out and perform. The last question I always ask all of my guests is the same one in some form or another. So from your perspective as a private hitting instructor working with high school athletes who are going on to college, like if you had to give one piece of advice to a high school kid or a family, like from where you sit, like what's the one thing you'd leave them with that you think is the most important thing to remember?
From the recruiting process, and I would say wait as long as you can. Wait as long as you can, compile as much good information as you can. Talk to as many people as you can. Try to find people who had experience in it. So take as long as you can and try to see things as a process, kind of down the line, not so much as a result right now. Because, the game is so short, right? We don't want to lose sight of actually playing the game, right? Like, we focus so much on today's lesson, like when we did bad, when in terms like, it's for something else. So like, that goes for anything. So like just not losing sight of the process, the perspective of it. But again, just kind of look at the marathon, right? Not the sprint.
Excellent. Well, that's a great way to end. I agree with that 100%. So Nick, thanks for coming on to the podcast. I appreciate it. It was great to talk to you, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. So, what's your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Nick Camilleri? My biggest takeaway is that being a good coach isn't just about knowledge of your sport. It's about being able to apply that knowledge to the needs of the athletes that you're coaching. Further, coaches don't need years of experiences to be good at their job if they have the right perspective. My suggestion to coaches is to use your playing experiences to best serve your athletes, but not make it about you. This is very challenging for many coaches, including myself. However, if the intention is to serve the athlete, then they will get better. I want to thank Nick for his kind generosity and the wisdom he shared with the Freshman Foundation community. You can learn more about Nick on his website at camilleri-baseball.com. To learn how you can be ready for the next step in your athletic journey, visit michaelvhuber.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back soon for episode 59.
Mike Huber is the founder and owner of Follow the Ball Coaching, located in Fairhaven, New Jersey. He is a mental performance coach and business advisor dedicated to serving athletes just like you reach their full potential on and off the court. The Freshman Foundation is all about helping you get to the next level. For more information, follow along on Instagram at the Freshman Foundation. Please subscribe. Give us a like on iTunes, Spotify, leave a review, tell a friend. And most importantly, come back in 2 weeks, ready to get better.